and choose when to send it or not. Same with SAT 2 subject exams. That's, I think, generally the way to handle it is go take it, get your score, figure out whether you want to release or not. The time that people don't do that is if they didn't plan well enough ahead, and we'll talk a little bit about planning, but if they didn't plan well enough ahead and they need to literally send it right away, and they're going to get whatever score they're going to get, and they're going to send that to the university. So if you're taking your SAT in December of your senior year, and that's your literal last chance, you got to send that. You have no choice.
And if you take the SATs or the ACTs and you don't like your score and you retake them, can you choose to only send one of the two scores,
Yep.
or do they see that you took it twice?
Right.
What's that?
Do they see that you took it twice?
No, you can
Only
send
what you
whatever score.
release.
You just send what score you want to.
There are some schools that do require that you send all scores.
That's
It's not
right.
a lot, but there are some.
Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, where they have everyone taking 1600, want to see, did you get a real 1600?
There's some others too that
Yeah.
require all scores.
Yeah,
But the tests don't require it.
that's right. And and the majority of schools that someone's applying to don't.
Right.
How long does it usually take after you take the ACT and the school wants, like, you take it once before, but you know, your grades aren't,
Yeah.
it wasn't a great score, so you took it again, and now they're wanting your scores, like.
Well, it's
How
your
long does it
application,
take?
right? So if you take your ACT in your junior year, right? You take it in May or April of your junior year, and you do very well on it. You don't have to release that score until your application, right? So you'll get your score. If you take it in April, you'll get it roughly a month later, give or take a few
What if
days.
you took it October 22nd?
You took it October 22nd. You got to send it. Well, if you're applying early decision or early action, you got to send it, right? Because November 1st is the date for most schools. November 15th for a handful. So you got to send that. If you're applying normal, like into normal application period, then you still have some time because that score will get released November 15th.
Does it usually take 4 to 6 weeks? Does it take?
No, so normally now, because it's all online, they'll release what your score was, your composite score, or your 1600 score, early on, and then the detail will come more 4 to 6 weeks later. So you'll know, like, okay, I got a 32 on the ACT. You won't know, like, you'll know the breakdowns, but you won't know those sub scores and those cross test scores or anything like that. That'll come 4 to 6 weeks later in a more elaborate score report.
Are there some overwhelming favorites for people to take amongst these because of the most competitive institutions? Like, do a lot of people go for the sciences first, or do you have any idea how that breaks down?
So what they really want to see is, I mean, honestly, what they want to see is mastery of all 4 of these areas, right? So if you've taken one of each of those and done really well, that's the best. There's a good question in there, like, which I don't know because I don't know their specific admission policy, but I can imagine Caltech or MIT really caring if you did well in math and science, and not so much if you did in English and history. But for most other universities, they want to see a well-rounded student, right? So if you apply to Yale or an Amherst or Williams, right, they want to see a well-rounded student, so they want to see that mastery across subject areas.
Okay.
And Mike.
When do you suggest taking your first round?
Of SAT or later?
Either.
Okay, so generally what I recommend for students is junior year that they take their first SAT or ACT kind of spring, on that time period where they prepare. They'll have the PSAT generally in October,
We
November,
just had
depending on their
it.
school. Yeah, I just had it. Some schools do it a little bit earlier. Some, I know Grant's doing, King School's doing it
16th.
tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So like some schools do it a little bit later, just depends. So you've had a practice round, you roughly know what you're gonna do on the SAT, which we can translate to the ACT, and have diagnostics, and then prepare for a late spring SAT or ACT. Yeah.
So with that, a lot of these, obviously they're working on getting recruited, and
Yeah.
a lot of the schools sometimes ask for academic reads pretty early on.
Yep.
So, so a lot of these guys are freshmen and sophomores, and kind of setting them up for success in terms of trying to get some of these tests under their belt early.
Yep.
Are you guys seeing a lot more of that, and does that change anything on how you treat the prep, or because a lot of them haven't taken a lot of the classes that prepare them better for performing well on these tests?
Yeah, I think that one's interesting, right? Because like you're in a little bit of a weird spot where college coaches want to see, will you qualify to play here, right? And you still need to do the best that you can, so you have the most optionality for getting into whatever college you want to get into. So I think for those students, who add that option, so that athletics option, you have to think about both things, right? And when you take that test. So I still think like you focus on that end of junior year test. 'Cause if you have the score end of junior year, the college coaches have plenty of time in that recruitment cycle to see whether you'll get in or not. And if you're really a top level athlete, as you probably know, they don't care as much about your score. They care, whether you can get into the school academically or not, but you don't need to be the top scorer at that institution, certainly. So for those students, doing really well in that end of junior year test really matters a lot more, and they don't necessarily have the same second chance that other students have. So depending on the student, I've worked with a handful of recruits over the years. For people who I think are going to do well and following a pattern, I think having that end of junior year test is great. They have that one opportunity, they normally maximize that opportunity. For students who I don't think are going to do as well, or we had a student one year who literally needed to get the qualifying score to go play Division I basketball. I was going to have him take as many tests as possible, right? Because he needed as many opportunities. He was going to be close. So he started December of his junior year and ended up taking 3 tests to get the qualifying score, and then he never wanted to talk to me again, but was really excited I got him into school. And now plays professionally in Europe, actually. So it all worked out well for him. But it depends on your profile of when you do it. And the athlete thing just is an additional variable to consider, right? Okay, how do I put together the best profile for myself? You guys are thinking about that athletically in terms of playing for club teams and high school teams and all that. You have to think about that on the academic side too, because institutions and coaches care about that. And we can talk more about that.
Yeah, I have a question. Caitlin, how early can you commit now? Is it before the end of?
19s and 20s. So it's freshmen. So that's
Yeah.
why. So
That's why she said, yeah.
primarily all these guys are 19s and 20s, right? Do we have any of our 18s here?
Yeah, so I mean, you have to think you're working with a very
Oh, yeah,
different. You're working with a very different landscape, and gosh, as an educator, I'm not an educator, but educators will tell you that it doesn't matter if you're an athlete or not. Test scores are super, super important, and they are to a large extent. But when you're a freshman and sophomore and you simply do not have the content knowledge,
Right.
I went through the process, and so did Caitlin. Being an athlete, it does change things for the better, I would say, especially if you're super competitive and can play at that high level. So yeah, to answer your question, Mike would probably change his answer to say, no, you can't wait until the end of junior year if you're committing
'Cause that's
that
what,
early.
A lot of the schools contact me asking for,
Yep.
their academic read and some of that stuff. So it's like, so if they can see now, if those kids can
Right.
track, but they ask what they've
What do they, and are they asking you for SAT and ACT scores specifically? Or just for?
They say it's a combination of
Right.
their test scores and their transcripts.
Right. Yeah, I mean, schools like that, I'd have to imagine, are relying much
Which
more
is
heavily on
crazy.
transcripts. It's insane.
Yeah.
Like I said, you can't expect a kid to do really well on a test if they haven't learned the subject
Right.
that's being covered. I would say, my instinct is to say, and I'm fairly certain this is accurate, that schools like that are going to rely much more heavily on your academic transcript than they are on any sort of SAT or ACT score. But that's just the way it has to be, It,
Well,
it doesn't.
I think the hedge on that is the diagnostics, right? Meaning that what you can do in a way that's not
You have
dictated by
a couple
anybody else.
edges, right? So like when you're a sophomore, you're generally taking the PSAT.
Right.
Right, so that's fall of your sophomore year. You're gonna have a score that's indicative roughly of where you're
And that's a
gonna.
usable score
It's a
Right.
usable score,
for the purposes of that.
and it's comparable to a whole bunch of sophomores in the country.
That's right. It's usable.
Right, and it's comparable to sophomores in the country, and you can see how you're stacking up against that. And ultimately, like, that's what they mostly care about, right?
Yep.
And so you can use that score.
Yep.
So I would say, like, for people getting recruited freshman or sophomore year, like what you're really trying to do if you're that type of athlete and you're going to, whether it be a Big Ten school or a Division I school where they're full academic rides, they want you to get a qualifying score, generally,
Right.
depending on the institution.
Yeah.
We can figure out whether you're going to get a qualifying score pretty quickly,
Mhm.
right, with a diagnostic plus that PSAT, and be pretty certain on that qualification score. I wouldn't worry about that too much. It's a different game when you're looking at, I'm going to play at a Middlebury, or I'm going to play at an Amherst, or I'm going to play at
D3 non-scholarship.
D3 non-scholarship, or I'm going to play at a Harvard or Yale,
Yep.
right, where they're going to consider your academic profile, your athletic prowess, and whether you're a sponsored, what's called a sponsored athlete. Those universities don't have scholarships, athletic scholarships, but they do have students that go into the academic